blending in. And we did a little bit of a study here at Cornerstone, and we noticed that if we forecast out these provisions and we forecast out the compressions, about a third of bankers under 50 billion in assets in the United States are going to have negative earnings in a negative ROA in the fourth quarter and first quarter in particular. So it becomes critical, how do we offset that, and what can we look for? And cost savings is one of the areas that we can look at. So today what I'm going to talk about is a methodology that we prescribe to folks. It can be scaled. So if you're a $50 million institution, you can do this just as well as a $50 billion institution. It doesn't need the same level of rigor maybe if you're smaller, but it's still a good process to go through. So hopefully that'll make sense with us. So one of the things we do not like is this austerity program model that says everybody's got to find 20% savings in their budget. That's not really the model that works, because it doesn't help those people who are smart leaders, who already are driving good organic growth in certain areas. And it can also just weaken the intent of being creative in this industry at this point, and could put you in some weird risks if you did some cuts in certain categories. I would argue that this is not the time to cut your credit risk assessment team. That's probably a team that you want to go and help build up right now, or at least transition some of the people who were doing other things into that team. So that's an example where you can increase operational risks. So how do we appropriately discuss? We use this alter ego called Gonzo here at Cornerstone, which is our crazy, what should we be doing? And one of the processes we recommend is, first of all, start with your strategy. What are your core competencies in your business model? Not everything's going to apply. If your bank is heavy commercial or your bank is heavy retail, you're going to have different core competencies and different levels that you're going to look at. Then we want you to take and develop scorecards in each business line. We're going to put targets on those scorecards that we're going to measure up against. And then we're going to go and look and see how we can execute off of that from either strategy and tactics. You know, what tactical action plans can we put into effect that are going to actually move the needle in the next 6 to 9 months? We often talk in Cornerstone about maturity models. And here's an example on consumer lending, just to give you some detail. You know, there are innovators. There are people who lead, there are people who manage, and there are people who just react. And you don't have to be an innovator in every category. That's the most important thing I want you to take away. If you are a commercial bank, maybe you're okay being a manager in the consumer lending world. And so when you set your goals and your targets and you're going to measure off of, you know, if you're an innovator, maybe you've got to have that decisioning done automatically, and you've got to have a 2-minute response rate while I'm online to whether or not I qualify for that home equity line of credit, or I qualify for that unsecured credit card, or I qualify for that auto loan, right? But if you're just managing, maybe a 2-hour response is fine, and you actually have some human decisioning that goes in and looks at that. There's nothing that says you have to meet the innovator's goal on each model. But you can look and see that there are lots of ways that people can measure these, and that's the intent behind this slide, is you can look and break out in these targeted scorecards, what are our customer journey touch points, and what are the areas that we're going to measure against. So we're going to look at the turnaround time, we're going to look at the number of apps per underwriter, are we going to look at decision rates, are we going to look at penetration and cross-sell, are we going to look at attrition models, how are we going to measure against all of these things? And so this is just another framework by which you can look at yourself and categorize. And then, you know, you can develop these scorecards, and I've got 3 scorecards in this deck. And so feel free to use this deck and take a look at it and see if any scorecards apply to you. But here's an example of, you know, what we might be looking for if we're in the mortgage business, right? And then what's our peer group, but then what is our average first mortgage loan size? How are we doing against that? What's the current value? What's our target? And then if you have information about your peers, what are the medians and the 25 decile and the 75th decile that we want to measure up against? And so this is an example of something you can do on a monthly basis to target and see if you're growing and going in the correct direction, if you're not going in the correct direction, or if you're just treading water, and you can then make course corrections on those tactical actions to arrive at the right point. And so again, you can think through your categories, but there's, these are pretty common categories for something like a lending scorecard, where you're going to look at revenue, you're going to look at staffing, you're going to look at your expenses, and you're going to look at some of the customer journey angle, where it's service and convenience. I'm not going to go through every category because it just wants to highlight this. Now, it starts with your strategy. So if you're going to sit down and relook at your 2020 plan that you probably developed in October of last year and has radically changed for the remaining quarter in the year, and then you're going to look at your 2021 plan, we would recommend that you take a look and create a graph that says, look, on the x-axis, we're going to measure the impact, and on the y-axis, we're going to measure the complexity of an initiative. And then you plot out your initiatives in that category. And the ones with high impact and low complexity are the ones that you're going to want to go execute, right? So they're easy effort, but they have the best benefit. I can tell you, in conversation after conversation, particularly around data analytics at Cornerstone, we're having a lot of institutions talk about their branch footprint. Do we, in the post-COVID environment, need the same branch footprint we needed before COVID? And is the question, did we accelerate the customer journey by 3 or 4 years in just a 6-month span to move them to more comfortable digital account origination and digital interactions with our banks? Or when we open our branches back up, right? And a lot of people are starting to do that, and they're doing it by appointment only, and they still have their drive-up window being the primary vehicle by which customers can interact. At the same time, all those new account originations that we do in the branch, all of those notaries we do in the branch, all the things we do for our customers that require it, we might be going to appointment-based solutions for that. And so is that a model we're going to continue? Or are we going to go back to seeing the same 50 customers that we always see? We know merchant transactions are way off the scale right now, right? They're not doing strap and coin because a lot of retail shops aren't open the same hours as they were. So, so when we go and look at these sorts of things and we say, this is high impact for us and low effort, the one thing we need to be able to do is go look at some of the transactional history that we've developed over the last several years. And one of the ironies is, if you're using Fiserv or you're using FIS or you're using Jack Henry, you probably got the data warehouse with your core solution. And when you go into that data warehouse, whether that's Jack Henry No or Fiserv iView or FIS BIC or whatever you're using there, you suddenly realize that you left it at the default transactional numbers. So you got 30 days of history or 45 days of history or 60 days of history. And that's not enough for you to draw a trend line. I'm going to give you a little secret from my old background. You know what system does have lots of history? Your anti-money laundering system. So whether you're using Banker's Toolbox or you're using Verifin or you're using Global Vision or you're using Jack Henry's Yellowhammer or FIS's Prime or Fiserv's AML Manager, you're going to have 5 years of history of transactions in there. And you can go back and use that to look at your teller transactions and map out how's your pre-COVID and your during COVID and your post-COVID teller line looking. How is your new account origination looking? Because those systems collect all that as well. So, so on the strategy plan, look at what you're thinking through. Do we want to beef up our digital account opening? That's what we're hearing from a lot of clients right now. How do we do that? How do we go and get more in the net interest margin squeeze? How do we get more interchange revenue? So what's our credit card strategy? What's our debit card strategy for penetration? We've seen a huge burst in call volume. What's our model on self-service on the digital channel and chat bots and that kind of stuff? But also, do we have the right call center technology in place? And maybe it's not as important for us right now to collect deposits. We all got flush with deposits at the beginning of COVID. As a matter of fact, we got more deposits than we knew what to do with in some cases. And so we're trying to figure out what's going on. We also saw a bump in our PPP loans if we got into the whole SBA side. Now we know that those loans will come off our book at some point. We get a 1% fee, which is fantastic, but we're not going to see the asset uplift. And so again, when we talk about cost saves, this is an area to negotiate with your core vendor because they're going to bump your asset tier. And that's a temporary asset increase. So something we'll talk about here in a few slides. So how do I look as a high performer? How do I look as a low performer? Well, I always have to think about, I'm going to design for the 90% case. You know, it's really easy when I'm a former banker, so I can get into a room with bankers and we could sit around and say, look, you know, this 10% exception is going to cause all sorts of kinks in the armor. And at the same time, we need to think through what is the 90% use case and how do we get there? And do we have the data to support it? And does that give us enough of a risk appetite that we're comfortable? So we're managing it versus eliminating, because we'll never eliminate risk. We just have to manage it. And then what are we going to do to hold people accountable to it in our culture? So some of the things to think about as a high performer, right? And so a lot of people think about expense management as how do we do that? And there's probably 4 big cases for how to do that. The first is, you know, what is excellence per business unit? And how do we define that? The second is, do we have to execute what we decided in October of last year? Everything is up for debate, right? So can we take last year's plan and kind of parse through it and find the good stuff, but then take the stuff that doesn't apply anymore? Like maybe we had a deposit gathering strategy. That doesn't apply anymore, right? And then, you know, it's not all about expense management. It's about execution. And it's about how do we hold the appropriate people accountable for their metrics and their goals. So here's an example. I'm going to give 2 examples. I'm going to give an example of IT spending. I'm going to give an example of branch rationalization a little bit. Because these are probably the 2 areas that you can focus on in Q4 of 2020 and in Q1 and Q2 of 2021 that might move the needle the most. That's why I picked these. So, right, everybody knows that we're under earnings, under pressure. What you might not know is IT spend is usually about 10% or more of your total non-interest expense. And it's usually not reviewed in detail. And so there's some areas where you can look and see, and this bleeds into the branch rationalization, but I can't tell you how many people, when we go out and look at their branch strategy, are still paying for, you know, ACDs or TCDs, the cash dispensers, that they're no longer even using. They're still paying for some back counter scanners that they've cycled over. They're still paying for a lot of receipt validation printers that they've cycled over. So, you know, that sort of stuff is easy wins. And so you need to go look over your over licensing and unused services. You're probably overpaying for services. I'm working with some clients right now and we're doing some contract negotiation, and I can assure you that most institutions are probably paying some per bill pay user fee. And the question becomes why? Bill payments are going down, right? There's 2 models that are creating bill payments going down. One is biller direct. I get rewards points for using my, you know, United Airlines Visa card. And so I'm going to put all my bills on that. So I go biller direct as a consumer. The second is that the billers are actually incentivizing me that if I go ahead and do a direct draw in my account, I save $5 on my monthly gas bill. And so we're seeing that go down. So why would you pay per user for bill pay, especially if I'm only doing 1 bill pay? Let's model it differently. Let's eliminate the per user per bill pay fee and go to a pure per bill payment fee with my provider. So that's an example of an area where we see significant cost savings if you go through and review your contracts and you're looking at it. And just keep in mind that there are a lot of providers out there. So you have a lot of leverage when you're looking to negotiate with your provider, not just on the core, but on the ancillaries as well. So let's dive into what we know. When we go in and negotiate market pricing, what we find is most of the financial institutions don't have market pricing knowledge. You have no idea what your peer down the street or your peer 1 state over is paying for the exact same service. So you're trusting that relationship manager. He or she's a great person, I'm sure. They've always been very good with you. And there's probably room on the table. And so what we have to figure out is how do we go through and find benchmarks or composite information about what people are paying for these services. I'm not here to sell you on Cornerstone Advisors. I'm here to share with you that one of our secret sauces is that because we've negotiated so many contracts, we have a big contract vault where we can compare. I'm working with a client on Fiserv Premier right now, and the beauty of it is I've got 45 sets of identical invoices I can compare and contrast with that particular client. So I can help them say, yeah, no, you're way out of line on your per user fee per core. And so that's an example of going in with at least the information of what you're negotiating. And so where are the spending opportunities? Well, clearly we talked about that hardware and that software. Maybe there's some idle equipment. Maybe there's some equipment coming up for upgrade. And so it makes more sense for us to look at a cloud offering than it looks for us to keep that in-house. Maybe there's some IT projects we can put on hold for now, and we can start rationalizing some of those products. Are there some areas where we can look in terms of redirecting staff? I hate this concept of cutting staff. Personally, I hate vendors who promise you're going to cut staff. I'm a big, you're going to redeploy staff because I've not seen a software package yet that has enabled me to eliminate 5 heads. I have seen a software package that has automated a lot of processes. So maybe those those old heads can help me now with this new initiative that we're driving at our financial institution. And so that's one of the things I often like to talk about. And so a couple of things to think about. Always review your invoices. I can't tell you the number of times. I just today worked with a client that found that their per core pricing was 3,000 customers more last month than it had been in prior months. They didn't gain 3,000 customers last month. So, somebody made a clerical error or something. And so we just have to look at it. Absolutely eliminate any kind of redundancies and don't let those contracts renew automatically. In most contracts and most master service agreements, you've got a clause that says, hey, if I don't notify you by this point, it goes into a 1-year auto renewal. Sometimes it goes into a 3-year or 5-year auto renewal. That's really bad. Make sure you have a list in your vendor management or your third-party risk management of when core contracts, when major contracts are coming up for renewal. And you can send a letter saying, do not auto renew for us. And then back to the cloud. Maybe if you've got an on-premise solution and you've got some hardware that needs to be upgraded, it's an opportunity for you to say, hey, we can save the CapEx on that, and we can move towards a hosted environment. Yes, the hosted price is going to be higher, but I can assure you in modeling that your operational costs will go significantly down. We typically see when a client moves in an outsourced core model, they reduce their in-house expense on everything from electricity to hardware increases to operational costs to lights out processing and nightly processing. The typical savings is $11,000 to $25,000 a month in those other categories. And we modeled that hundreds of times. So how do we look at this? Well, first of all, not every line item is going to make a dent. So you might eliminate a 0.02 or a 2-cent, line item, but you only had 150 of those a month. So your whopping savings is not going to make a difference. There is definitely going to be an 80-20 rule. I can assure you, I've looked at a couple of contracts recently. One of them was 160 lines and 18 lines made the big difference for them. In the other case, it was over 370 lines and 12 lines made the big difference for them. So look through the line items and evaluate those expenses. Make sure that if there's license increases, do you actually have the staffing, especially since we're thinking of restructuring our staffing? Do I need the same number of teller seats? Do I need the same universal banker seats on the new account origination? How am I going to model that? And then do I switch to less expensive components? We've all gone to this remote workforce. We've all become Zoom junkies. Or Teams junkies or whatever tool we're using. There are solutions like Teams that are built into our Microsoft licensing. So do we have to pay for a third-party conferencing solution? So that's an opportunity to take a look. And then again, Here's some of the areas that we recommend you take a hard look at, just as an opportunity to save some money. Core account processing is probably one of your #1 categories, and so is your online bill pay. So those two areas I would really drive into. I would also look at your debit processing. If you're paying for Excel PIN network fees, something like 4 to 6 cents, maybe you can negotiate that down to 2 cents a transaction, that kind of thing. So something to think through there in the list. We've talked about the cloud, and cloud means a lot of different things to bankers. The biggest issue I would say is most providers, whether it's Fiserv or Jack Henry or FIS, are saying cloud when they really just mean secure data center, which we've been around for years on. And the beauty of those secure data centers is they've got a very robust SOC 2 Type 2 in place, where they've got control objectives that get measured by a third party, that gets reported upon. So you're not dealing with a lot of the upstarts. Now, I will say we did some research with a company recently, and what we found is that while 22% of the current third-party applications are cloud-based, that's going to move to 78% over the next 5 years. So when you evaluate a cloud vendor, one of the things you really want to look at is their robustness. I've had a lot of cloud vendors that are these fintechs, the two guys and the dog kind of philosophy, where the dog is responsible for security. And what ends up happening in that regard is you say, look, I need your SOC 2 Type 2. And they say, oh, we're hosted on Amazon Web Services, or we're hosted on Microsoft Azure. Here's their SOC 2 Type 2. And you as the banker have to say, stop. That's great. I need that in my files too for my third-party risk management, but I need your SOC 2 Type 2. And many times these fintechs are like, what? So you have to ask the appropriate questions, and it does put a burden on your IT team or your third-party risk management team, what we used to call vendor risk management. Now, FFIEC's changed the title on us. But, under operational risk, we have to look at that third-party risk management component. But, there's some pieces there. So a benchmark, for example, that we often look at is just in staffing, right? And so for every 160 million in assets, how many people do they have in IT, right? So this is one person at the median. In the lower decile, which means that they're not doing as well in the percentiles, for every 118 million in assets, they have an IT person. Whereas the more higher performing institutions at over 200 million in assets, they have one IT person. So it's just an opportunity to look. We're going to ignore the credit union line because we're not credit unions on this call. But the intent here is to look at, where you are, and do we fill that open position, or do we hold off on that? And look at it. Sometimes we say, well, that's a month's savings. And the question becomes, are we jeopardizing something like security or regulatory requirements? I can assure you one of the most significant cease and desist orders that's come down in the last 2 months is the C&D against Capital One. Now, Capital One got an $80 million fine for having a breach at a third-party data center. Actually a cloud vendor that they partnered with, and the cloud vendor left their database unsecured, and so hackers got into it. And Capital One got written up because they didn't vet the cloud vendor properly. Now, $80 million is not going to make a dent in Capital One. The C&D creates a big problem. The problem for them is that now regulators are going to be back every 3 weeks investigating Capital One's mitigation plan. And if regulators don't like what they see within the first 6 months, they can take the enforcement action even further. And so what's in your wallet? Not a Capital One credit card if they choose to go down that path, right? So that's the risk for them. $80 million, that would crush my old bank, right? Even an $8 million fine would crush my old bank. So their argument here is it's a scale issue for them. Where the pain in the neck's going to come is in their ability to grow. In the case of most of our community institutions, where the civil monetary penalty is pretty significant, and the additional scrutiny from FFIEC is not very fun, whether you're OCC regulated or FDIC regulated or FRB regulated. So, all right. let's take a look at another example, branch footprint real quick. So again, when we look at the overall model, branch spend is typically 80% of your total channel expenses, including digital, mobile, ATMs. You mentioned it. You might have courier services or some other model to serve some of your cash intensive businesses or your high net worth individuals, or however you do that. Branch spend can still be 80%, and that makes total sense, right? We got to build these brick and mortar shops. It costs about $1 million to actually build a branch these days. We got to staff them, we got to maintain them. There's a lot of expense in it. So the question becomes, are we at a place where we've accelerated the digital adoption of many of our consumers, and we can segment our consumers and we can segment our commercial users, and we could say, these are the people who will never change. Right? And we can almost go demographically like that, right? There are some demographics that just want to talk to a person and interact in person. And I bet you if you talk to your lead tellers at every branch, they can name those customers by name. They can, so even if you don't have a sophisticated data analytics, you can just ask your head tellers, you know, who are the people who post-COVID are going to come into the branch every day? And they'll give you a list of 50 customers. So, you know, what do we do for them? How do we staff appropriately? How do we make sure we take care of cash needs for businesses when businesses get back to needing their strap and coin exchange and their other commercial deposit activity? How are we going to take care of our churches that come in, used to come in on Monday with that big stack of 400 checks that they got in the collection plate and haven't been doing that because they haven't been open? You know, so some of the businesses and things that we work with are going to come right back. But then, you know, what's our plan if we decide to consolidate to take care of those very much in-person type of customers that we typically work with? Is that some sort of interactive ATM? Is that sort of some leave behind? Or do we go to just a drive up or some smaller setup? You know, what's our model there that we need to look at? And so that's the kind of stuff that we're suggesting you take a look at. We have some clients that are going very aggressively and saying, look, 50% of my branches, I'm going to shutter. Some are like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to take 1 or 2 branches out of my 10 branch network and do something with that. So, you know, it depends on your demographic and your geography and what's there. I'm not a good pool player. When I go to play pool or billiards with my friends, I get my butt whipped. And the good players will say, it's not so much about making the shot. That's critical. It's about the leave. It's about where the white ball ends up on the table afterwards, the cue ball, so I can line up my next shot, right? So when you go through your tactical plan, it's about taking care of that high touch customer base. And are they willing to go another mile down the road to a different branch location or change their behavior to a different way of interacting with us? And that's the question you have to ask. So what is that looking like? Well, we had a chance to go ahead and pull data over the last several months, and we're already seeing pre-COVID interactions with the branch going way down. So we're seeing some shift in the demographics pre-COVID, right? So what we used to see almost 7, 8 years ago is you know, about 5,500 teller transactions per branch. And that dropped to 4,100 to COVID. You can argue that that's dropped down to, you know, 2,000 or 1,000. And you got to go back to your transaction systems, either your teller systems or your anti-money laundering systems or something, to go find where it is in COVID and where it's hovering. I would argue that, you know, the drive ups, you need to even break that kind of transaction out to how many of those are merchants and how many of those are consumers. And then what kinds of transactions are happening at that? Are they all deposits? Are they some withdrawals? Are they strap and coin? What are the types of things? So on us is going to be your #1 teller transaction. Checking deposit is probably going to be #2. Savings deposit somewhere around #3 or 4. So you need to rank order these, just like you have your speed keys on your teller system. right? On the new account deposit side, we already saw lots of drops, which is really sad because it tells us that we're seeing fewer and fewer people come into the branches to open accounts. The other figure I didn't put in here that's a metric that you need to think about is the open to close ratio is still hovering around 1.2 or 1.3 to 1, which means for every 13 accounts I open, I close 10. So is that meaning I'm losing that many customers, or is that a rollover of a CD? Or is that a consolidation or a move to a new checking account? Is that something from fraud where I came in and said, I need to close this credit card account and open a new one because I had fraud on the old one? So you need to analyze why your open to close ratio is where it is. And that's a huge factor in determining what's going on in your new deposit origination side. I will argue on this little pie chart on the bottom left that commercial loan officers at the past were sitting there and saying 40% of my time I'm going to be going out and getting new business. And right now, apart from the PPP crunch that we all felt, and apart from some C&I loans that we're seeing, we're not probably seeing a lot of CRE loans. We're not probably seeing a lot of the other areas that we were in. So the question becomes, does this pie chart change? And do I go from 40% of my energy being on new sales to 40 or 50% of my energy being in portfolio management? What are my credit risks? What have I categorized my loans by NAICS code? Have I figured out who my rent rolls recently? Have I gotten my financials recently? Have I measured any of that kind of stuff? This is all the common sense stuff credit officers should be doing right now, or loan officers should be doing right now. And if they don't have the ability to do it because they just don't have the time in the day, do I repurpose some of those branch team members who maybe are doing, as a friend of mine who works as a teller for a pretty large organization says, I get paid 3 weeks at a time. 1 week of that, I'm still off. And does he occupy his 1 week of idle time by actually going out through rent rolls and pulling back financials and reaching out to the businesses and saying, I need some of that stuff. And then again, has contact center expense gone way up? And has digital expense remained where it is, and we've accelerated this digital journey? So something to think about. So we did a survey at Cornerstone Advisors asking our bankers, what do you think is going to be the impact, and what do you think is going to be the permanence? And what we saw is drive-up transactions have gone up 10-fold. Contact center calls have gone up 5-fold. Digital sign-ons are increasing, but not to the degree we thought they would. So who are the people who are not using digital right now, and what are they doing, and what do we need to reach out to them? But we are seeing clearly a massive shift in the branch transaction model. We're seeing a massive shift in the new accounts being opened at the branches. And then the people who thought that would be permanent, in this survey, we judged were pretty conservative. They thought, oh no, it's not, people aren't going to switch over to an online account origination model. And part of that is when you look at online account origination, whether it's from Meridian Link or whether it's from Bottom Line Technologies for commercial cash management, or any of the number of providers out there. We don't endorse any providers, by the way, at Cornerstone. So please don't take that as an endorsement. I'm just giving examples of people in this space. And you look at the actual abandon rates, it can be significant. Some of that significance in abandon rates can be because we make it a hard process. Because of AML, we want to get the due diligence information for beneficial ownership. So you got to send me a gazillion documents after you go in so I can make sure I can actually open this account. So we don't even get to funding. So as you look at your online account opening journey, you're going to have to take a look and see did I put in friction points that are going to cause my customers not to actually get all the way through the process? And are those friction points something I can automate, like digital identity verification or something along those lines? And what's my vendor's role in that? So here's an example of a scorecard that you could use for branch sales and service. Some people measure by branch, some people measure by square foot. This particular institution wanted to go by square foot. What's my attrition rate? What are some of the things there that I can do? One of the things about attrition is customers tell you way in advance. I did a study with a client years ago, and we found that when somebody closed or stopped direct deposit, there was a 92% chance they close that account within 6 months. And a lot of banks say, yeah, we look for that. Well, that's like calling somebody, that's like coming home and finding a note on your door that says, I'm leaving you, you bastard. I'm done with the relationship. And you say, honey, can we talk? They've already moved their stuff out, folks. So what are other triggers we're going to look for? What are other things we're going to look for? Are we going to look for fewer and fewer interactions? Well, COVID's caused that. So how do we model that out? Are we going to look at balance decreases over time? Are we going to look at increased credit purchases or ACHs going out to other institutions? You know, what's going on? So what's our model that we're going to look for on that? And so some of the things to think through here are, you know, are there some productivity measurements we want to put in clearly? Are there some risk management pieces, right? I did a survey years ago where we were looking to see if tellers were cross-sell people. And what we found was that when we surveyed our bankers, 83% said cross-selling is as important as balancing your drawer. That's fantastic, but you don't fire a teller when they don't cross-sell 3 times in a month, but you fire a teller who doesn't balance his or her drawer 3 times in a month, right? So what's on your scorecard and how do you look at it and how do you really measure it? So something to think through as you're putting this is just an example we wanted to provide to you. And then again, some metrics we wanted to give you again, back to that median versus back to that lower decile versus the higher decile and the 75th percentile. You know, what are some of the teller transactions per branch we saw in 2019? Now, all this has changed in the last several months, and we're working feverishly to gather the 2020 figures. But how many new accounts did a platform rep open? You know, what is going on with the employees per branch? And can we work our way into having more universal bankers than people who are pure tellers or people who are pure platform or CSRs or new account reps, or how does that work? And then again, back to deposits per branch. Now, I'm going to tell you from my banking days, deposits per branch were a kind of a big fighting match that happened a lot between our clients. You know, I originated that deposit. Well, I'm the servicer of that deposit. So you're going to have a little bit of branch manager battle to go through when people look at that figure and say, no, I lean on the side that while they might have opened the account over here, if they're going to this branch every time for their account servicing, that's their branch of record. Right. And then you're also going to maybe even want to segment some of this into your customer types. You know, a customer who has a direct deposit with you and uses you as their primary financial institution and has 3 or 4 services in their household, that's a more valuable customer than the one that has only savings account. Right. On the merchant side, your primary financial institution status to me is driven by the fact of whether or not you've got the primary credit line with them. And so those are the components that you need to think through in some of the segmentation, not just pure dollars, but how much of that is because we're the primary financial institution. But this gives you an example of branch benchmarks that you might be able to use in your discussion. Now, I went through that pretty quickly, but I wanted to give some time for questions, and I wanted to make sure it wasn't too slow of a pace. So I'm open for questions at this point. If you don't feel comfortable asking me a question in this forum, I absolutely gave my email at the very beginning, and I love talking with bankers. So shoot me a private note, and I'd be thrilled to pick up the phone and give you a call, and we'll just have a conversation. So any open questions before we segue to letting everybody get back onto their lunch?
John, I do not see any questions that came in. I wondered if you wouldn't mind for just a moment telling us a little bit about the Gonzo Banker blog.
Sure. So again, Cornerstone has this alter ego. You know, sometimes people are really nice in our industry, and it's because our industry is super related, right? You never know who's going to be your boss at your next institution for your next week, right? So we have to be very nice to each other. Gonzo is Cornerstone's attempt to at least lay things on the line. we like to share openly our opinions about what's going on in the marketplace, where we're seeing maybe banks fall down, where we're seeing some fintechs that are really gaining. It is not an inflammatory or a judgmental thing like bankers, you suck. It is just an opportunity for us to say, this is the data, guys, take a look at it. So we have a site, gonzobanker.com, where people write articles based on some of the data. And some of it might be helpful how-tos, like, hey, about 6 months ago, I wrote a quick gonzo on, hey, if I'm looking at my credit risk portfolio, here's the stuff I better get under my belt right now. Here's the data elements I need to go get, right? That's an example of a how-to. Others will say, hey, did you know that Chime on their new account origination is getting, on their online account origination is getting this level? Does that measure up to your banks? Why is Chime being so successful? What, you know, this online bank, how are they stealing market share? So how do we need to benchmark ourselves against somebody like that? So I don't know, Stephanie, if that answers your question, but it's our ability to write blogs and write articles from Cornerstone Advisors' perspective based on the data that we're seeing out in the industry.
It's fabulous. I definitely recommend that you all sign up for the blog. I will share the recording with all of you today by email. Please check your spam, by the way, to see that coming. I will send this over by tomorrow morning. We've had several banks mention that it goes to their spam. So I do appreciate your time today, John and Jen. Thank you to all our bankers for joining the MBA Service Corp and Cornerstone Advisors. Please join us next Tuesday, same time, same place, for our September 29th contract negotiation webinar. So take care, stay safe, and thank you very much.
Thank you all.